I personally also believe that some influence also had my origins had it too? Florentine, i.e. this idea of infinity that does not belong to modern architecture, but the concept of infinity belongs to the experience, Renaissance, when they managed to represent the infinite horizon, and the author, the viewer, the observer, must be placed to represent a scene, an event. A narrative must be placed outside. From this is the point, the same point of the observer. So, one graduated in 1966, spent in a climate very particular that was related to the first constitutional crisis of the rationalism of movement, even of the modern movement, was opening up a whole series of episodes that have transformed Western culture. Then I will do the end. The newest imprinting was from this extreme realism of pop culture. That is, this vision of a reality, by now invasive, out of control, consisting of all commercial promotion, communications, languages, and expressions, which were entirely external, the theorems of classical modernity. So we say for example, my thesis, that by the way is preserved to the historical archives of the Pompidou Center, had as its theme a permanent Luna Park inside a shopping center, so completely out from the expressionist tradition of those whom, in short, then it is from this movement of extreme dynamic realism is NATO, the radical movement, especially in Italy, and especially, strangely enough, in Florence, which was a city like today, which actually does not have, I would say, direct reports. With modernity is certainly not a company urban characterized by an avant-garde culture, but maybe, in this, also favored the fact that my generation, who had studied literature in Florence, elaborate a different idea of modernity. Outside, we talk about parameters typical of industrial culture, and also of the social order that all this would involve. An interesting book has recently been released, published by Princeton Press. Is written by Pier Vittorio Aureli, who is a daddy and idol, American teaching at both Berkeley and Columbia, which analyzes the very links that there have been between political thought of avant-garde, so operaist, until the beginning of the 60s. So, with characters who were not political activists but were philosophers' workshop. From the Renaissance onwards is a position external to events, but with this idea of one infinite scenario. Concept of infinity does not belong to the culture of the project, working always on limit, on the perimeter, on events, on the composition, volumes, etc. So a whole series of a reality also professional, began to go. Crisis. And then I also think a component, a important, comes from the attitude in which you place yourself, i.e. you can design with absolute legitimacy and dignity. On short time you can design for short time. So for the market, for very specific questions, very well defined, but you can also work on long times, i.e. where it places the position that I have often mentioned, compared to my work, as the position of theoretical concepts, which elaborate theorems of the behaviors of relationships of which one does not understand the meaning. For example, also in the technological research have been, I don't know, for example, the laser beam, before being interpreted as something useful. Several have passed, several years, several decades. So much so that they said scientists, and they elaborated it, Chavano. We have found the solution. Now you have to find the problem. That not the two things were going at speed different, so this attitude. My happiness is that it is not presented in this book. Elisa Cattaneo, which collects precisely this elaboration, bottom, so that it has not, which has no reason. I know one asked me, is a position, so that I always joke, like me many others, and to be the owner of myself. I do things. I try to do things that interest me. I try to answer this my curiosity, but that is something that it comes out of me. I no commission, and makes me produce all this wine material. So somehow it is illuminated in the sun of uselessness. That is, I should say, because then, reading the introduction of contributions critical of this work, they know I was very pleased. But obviously, they also explained to me things. I will do this theoretical work, but we know that I have always been very prudent. The definition of what is useful and what is not useless, that is then this. Many others, but it is not that SIA, just my attitude, but this. These two categories do not belong to me, because also I must note that many times people who have worked without a commission, first-day students, that is me and Michel de Lucchi, we teach because we must learn, and therefore there is no problem with somehow teach a design mode already defined, but rather that to train a designer. So the paradox is that the school, i.e. the university, must somehow train self-taught people, of people who do not reproduce the traditional profile, professional, but they are people who can to walk on their own 2 feet and interpret the world around him which is an ever-changing world. In this sense, we called it to Piazzabausen, because it is close to the Polytechnic, service strings, and relationships, but it has one-to-one different foundation, which is precisely this of the A of the idea of figure of the self-taught who is formed inside a university facility, producing materials theoretically useless, then actually are the ones that have resisted the best. Over time, I often give you the example is ancient Rome, of which the entire military system, economic, and also monumental, ended up in ruins. That is, yes, then they are seen from certain ruins. Some monument part. But there is no Rome. What remains? In reality, they are his poets. Virgil, Horace, Video. But the rest a no ashes. But they who have done this job, useless, apparently useless, that no one commissioned him, no one bought it, but they are the ones that hold up. More, and this is a typical feature. Restoration of the creative culture of art, of the so-called, of independent research. So this book. In this book, I have to say, with so much passion and constancy, 600 pages. 6 years of work that Elissa did. I barely recognize myself in it. Because, curious, to many things I did not remember. Then rereading them, I found them interesting with some surprise. Yes, i.e. look, yes. Yes, i.e. his patience to put together all this material, somehow, is an absolutely original operation. Get out all this? That maybe has been processed 50 years and older. VA to find it today as a material of reflection in American universities. AY print is produced by CD Edito Dactor and will be presented around for universities, the major universities of Dog, etc. Another one to conclude. Other component. Important notice is the one opposing the title. That is, the project was continued at the time of relativity. The concept of relativity, which was developed by Einstein, but also belongs to the thought, somehow to Jewish thought I am. And that has this kind of logic. Very different from that Christian accidental. That is, a culture that has no dogmas and does not have a Vatican, which he somehow is simply a system of places, schools, rabbis that, also among them in polemical contradiction, an example accompany the Jewish one, that can't stand. Figuration and synagogues. There must be no human representation. This kind of schism somehow, is perhaps also at the origin of this idea of an expression, and becomes service becomes, but is no longer. No longer has a problem of form indeed, rejects it completely. So this book was also an opportunity for me to reflect on me, not only as a theorist, but as an identity process. Deeper. So, really a book. Very important. I do not recognize myself. That this is part. To be faced with one scenario. Theoretical, that has lasted for more than 50 years. In short, some fool produces it. Trauma can produce it. ISA images. Is curious to hear Stefano. I think that the jobs of the designer and architect is not only one profession, i.e. one response to one request, but the projects it is one form of interpretation of the story. Change in society. The change in general sensitivity. Yes, I think that the Western culture, which has always sent to other countries the codes trained of modernity, at the moment it is starting to modernize from of the experience of Oriental philosophy. From Jade, she has our upsides, so say in the 60s. I thought. The city is no more than one set of architectural boxes, but it's more like a territory, where there are the merchants of Alzinger, markets the objects, who realizes the new landscapes that form these types of the living in Skype that changes who is. And I find that this is very advanced in postponement to our tradition. Very rigid, very definitive, who is always in crisis, because it does not have the one test. She did not plan changes and novelties, new technologies, lifestyle changes. And there, on the contrary, there is this idea of a hospitality. Global cosmic, where everything is accepted. I chose to make the drawings one, not for professional causes, not for philosophical reasons. I have worked mostly related to my interests. No to of orders arriving outside, by which I have nothing. No criticism. Between the things that are here, I think there are things that can be one curiosity. For example, the themes of death, who is present in several projects and belongs to exactly one territory. Anthropological, very important, on which in general modernity has never had one confront. On the other side there is the presence of the nature of the fires, of nature of trees, etc., which is one presence that I have introduced into blood commitments. I am looking to make one passage that goes in eliminate this high referentiality of the language, because the fires of the trees of nature, since the moment they are always unique, it becomes like saccharine presences, and so a mysterious A. Because a small piece of tree has one high energy. I am interested in these things a lot, and I try this type of presence. Massimo Cacciari, mayor of Venice, was one of the young representatives of this new theories that they foreread so the end of bourgeois culture, the birthday of another type of much more secular culture devoid of all that apparatus of typical hierarchies of the previous century. So, the radical movement is NATO in this climate? The idea was an Italian movement above all, but then also international, in the sense that has developed in Austria, in the United States, in France, etc. The Italian one, in my opinion, was the one who had promised a preparation, broader policy, and had many contradictions inside, like all these movements. Obviously, uncontrollable, that were also born from an energy. Generational. I would say it produced. Very quickly arrived having to draw a profile of this to movement. To important theorems. The first was the one that the future of industrial companies. How to say it wouldn't have been a future in order. Therefore, in rationality, in standardization, as the current idea had grown, and would be instead a future in complexity, in anarchy, in the development of offers, languages and expressions more and more numerous as in fact than the thing has happened today. We can say that was important. With respect to this idea of order, that modernity also interpreted in a reductive manner, it seemed then prefigure the other point. How important is that the radical movement was the first who reported the fact that had broken the unit of the modern project, i.e., the urban project instead of urban design, architecture, and the entire commodity universe, so that of design were not, who collaborated in a harmonious way to realize this future in order were conflicting cultures, i.e., since then, as today is also observed in this 2-year period. But all that has happened in the last 20 years. The conflict between architecture and cities, the conflict between the commodity universe, a architectural culture, is now very evident. Indeed, it is what feeds the most important energies. So this is a little the sense of radical movement. Italian. To build steel is a very complex culture. Interpreting history and technologies, changes in society. A small part is destined to be built. Objects were not simply a professional choice, a philosophical choice. The idea that, in the future, there would be an objective society, not an architectural civilization, a society where object flows are. So, the object is never an object finite in itself, always has a relationship with the environment, with people, with history, with a material. I think, to serve a vessel formation on the rotating lathe. For example, clearly that very old technology